We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday's Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.
This is Jeremy McFarland for the Footballist Family Podcast. And one of the things that I like most about doing a podcast is meeting different people. I've had the opportunity over the past almost year now to talk to a lot of different people about what makes sports special to them, especially football. Today's guest is no different. We've had Dana Auguster on before, but today he is on as a member of the Sports History Network with his podcast, Historically Speaking. I've enjoyed talking with him over the weeks that he has been part of this network, and I think you're going to enjoy this interview as well, as much as I did, really. Dana is a very knowledgeable host. He is very knowledgeable in sports history, not just in football, but in a lot of different things. And he's a funny guy, too, so I know you're going to enjoy this. If you would like to be part of this podcast, maybe come on or maybe giving your opinion on a football history or give me trivia, whatever it may be, you can message me at Jeremy_McFarland on Twitter or follow us on the Footballist Family Facebook page. And as always, please go over to the Sports History Network at sportshistorynetwork.com and listen to it. I think we have around 18 different podcasts available to talk about sports history and many other things, but mainly sports history. If you want to be part of that, please go and subscribe and rate and review each one of these great podcasts that we have to offer. And we're back to Footballist Family Podcast. I got my buddy Dana Auguster from, you want to introduce your program for us?
Yes, sir. I'm Dana Auguster. I am the host of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast right here on the Sports History Network. And I'm glad to be here with my man, Jeremy J. Mac, who I like to call. And, I'm not sure if he likes that nickname or not, but that's just a nickname I just threw on him. That's one of the things we do in Louisiana. We give everybody nicknames. So J Mac is his, and I'm glad to be here once again, man, coming back as a returning champion.
Well, yeah, there you go. There you go. Hey, just don't call me late for dinner. That's all that matters.
Right on.
Now, Dana and I had, we've been talking a lot about life in general and sports specifically. And your last episode, which I think dropped, I can't remember exact date, but you talked about sports, what things have changed and what we don't see anymore. Right. And, can you tell us a little bit about what some of the sports things in your life that have changed over the years?
Oh, gosh. Some of the things that I, especially since this is football, one of the things I talked about in my podcast was just different aspects of, dealing with pro football. Stick'em was one of the things that we talked about on the show was how people don't use, you can't use it. Not that you can't, you can't use it, it's illegal. Stick'em was a substance, if you're not sure about, it looked like if you took caramels, the caramel squares, and you put them in a pot and you melted it and you just smeared it all over yourself to help you catch passes. That's one of the things that was outlawed by the NFL. Ken Stabler of the Raiders said it looked like you could lay brick with it. And it was one of those things that you don't see anymore. And some of the things in sport, in football mainly, that you don't see anymore, like college football all-star games and, things of that nature that you used to see. Like, I remember as a kid growing up watching the blue-gray game out of Mobile, Alabama every Christmas. That was before the NBA took over Christmas. But that was one of the things I used to look forward to with the college all-star games. And that's two things right off the top of my head that no longer exist in football that was big. Also, the Burt Bell postseason playoff bowl, which was two third place teams playing for basically for charity at the end of the year. There's nowhere in the world you get two third place teams in the NFL to play each other pretty much for charity. I don't think you see that anymore, do you?
I don't think so. Even though it would be pretty neat. It'd be pretty neat to see that. I think it would be one of those things that they said, you know what, we're not getting paid, we're not going to do it.
Right. Yeah. Money rules everything now, unfortunately. But there's a few guys out there that would just go out there just for the love of the game, and that's one of the things that you really don't see anymore in pro football, I guess.
Well, that's and yeah, I think there's some things I'm glad that are changing, like how we view safety with football.
Right.
We don't want to see the Mike Websters happen as often as
No,
they did.
you're right. Safety has become a big issue in the NFL, and rightfully so. You're looking at someone who dealt with a concussion in high school. You're also looking at someone who my stepson had a concussion while playing football, so that was scary. So the safety aspect of it is very important, and I'm glad they decided to make that a mandate all across the league of concussions and concussion protocol and all of that.
Well, that's important, and also it extends not only the playing life of a person, but also the quality of their life too. But the things that I want to talk to you about, number one, we talked a little bit the last time you were on about Steve McNair,
right?
And what do I remember it correctly that you got to see him play in person?
Yeah, I did. I actually saw him play in person twice. His junior and senior years at Alcorn State. And like I said before, I had seen him do some things at Alcorn State that I haven't seen anybody do since. If you could imagine, Steve McNair in college was like watching the quarterback of the Baltimore Ravens right now, Lamar Jackson, but almost as big as Cam Newton, do some of the things that Lamar Jackson does, but that size. That was Steve McNair at Alcorn State. He was absolutely scary to watch. He really was.
Now, one thing about this, obviously, I make it clear that I'm a Titans fan through and through. I remember when they first came to Nashville, and he took us to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And a lot of what you will read about him is he stayed on the injured list, but he was able to play through it. I don't think that you could find somebody as tough as him. I don't think you can do that today. I think a lot of people would probably say, you know what, you're up. We're going to put you up for a couple of weeks because of the beating he took.
Yeah, and it was right. It was a little bit of a different culture then because of like what we just talked about, the safety aspects of it. That was the main thing with Steve, was that he was so tough and he was so durable, but he was always hurt. And coaches now would probably put him on the side and say, "Look, you need to sit for a minute. You need to sit for a while. So you need to sit off. Rest a couple weeks. We got this until you're able to come back at full strength." But Steve, I don't think, was the type of guy that would really want to hear of it. He would want to come out there and keep playing as long as if he could walk, then he probably would be able. He'd be out he'd be on the field if he could walk, knowing the way that he was. And he was that way at Alcorn, from what I remember.
Well, that Jeff Fisher once said that if he had a nap before a game, he was okay.
Right.
And that's just who he was. Hearing about his growing up in Mississippi, that's the way he was raised. And that's one thing about schools like Alcorn State and Grambling. You don't hear a lot about the college life of a lot of those young men who play there, but you're missing out of a lot of great stories, number one, and number two, a lot of great athletes that we're now just hearing about.
Yeah, well, the NFL did a really cool thing right before, I think it was Super Bowl 51, where they introduced all of the Hall of Famers that came from the historical black colleges and universities. I thought that was really cool. They did like a pregame ceremony. They had all the guys like Mel Blount and Aeneas Williams and Jackie Slater and those guys. Charlie Joyner went to Grambling. A whole bunch of guys that went to those different schools that was that made the Hall of Fame, and they did a wonderful ceremony. That and there were like many Hall of Famers that came, and great players nonetheless, who came out of those colleges and universities that you don't necessarily talk about or know about so much.
Well, and maybe it's time for the NFL to do more about that. But when you do a little bit of research about historically Black colleges and the impact that they have had on the NFL, I don't think you have an NFL the way it is today.
No,
without those trailblazers.
Well, look, I did. Actually, I was on the show with the Pigskin Dispatch a week ago, and I don't think it has dropped. It's dropped yet, but we talked about the famous number 12s. The quarterback. All the guys that they're really great players that wore number 12. We talked about all the Hall of Famers. And future Hall of Famers and Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. We talked about Staubach and Greasy and Stabler and all of them. But I also brought to mind two other quarterbacks who also wore number 12, who came from historical Black colleges and universities. That was a big impact on the NFL. And that was one, Doug Williams.
Yes.
Who wore number 12. Now, people remember him with the Redskins when he won the Super Bowl. He was wearing 17.
Right.
But when he was with the Bucs in the late 70s, early 80s, he wore number 12. And he was part of the resurgence of the Buccaneers when they went 0-26, and he was part of that resurgence from worst to first type their worst to first team in 79. And also talked about James Harris, who was the quarterback of the Rams in the early 70s. And I told this story to Darren that a lot of people don't know that when James Harris became the starting quarterback for the Rams in 73, I think it was 72, 73, he took over for John Hadle, and he came from Buffalo. They were looking for a head coach. They eventually hired Chuck Knox to be the head coach of the Rams, but a lot of people don't realize or don't know that one of the people that was up for the Rams for that coaching job that Carol Rosenblum wanted was Eddie Robinson.
Really?
Eddie Robinson was interviewed for the Rams coaching job in 1973, the job that Chuck Knox eventually took, because he had James Harris at quarterback, and he wanted his college coach to coach James Harris in Los Angeles. And Eddie Robinson really came close to getting that job. He really came close to taking it. I think Carol Rosenblum almost offered it to him, but at the last minute, Eddie Robinson said, "I can't leave Grambling. I can't do it."
Now, how long was he there at Grambling?
53 years, I want to say.
Oh, just a couple of days then, huh?
Yeah, he just had a cup of coffee with the Tigers.
Now, if I remember correctly, he holds the NCAA all-time win record.
Yes. Well, he's I think it's passed now by Bobby Bowden, but he's had it for like forever. I think Bobby Bowden has it now. But if he does have it, I think it's between him and Bowden. But I want to say Bowden has it, but he had it for a long time before Bowden did.
Well, let me ask you. You watch football in the 70s, 80s, 90s,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you're seeing the difference. One of the things that you talked about in your last was the things that are not there. How different would football be right now, NFL be, if it wasn't for, the Steelers being the number one thing, looking at historically Black colleges? How different would NFL be right now?
Without the Black colleges?
Well, let's say, because eventually talent's going to win out. We get that. And people who are smart are going to realize it doesn't matter the color of their skin. If they're good men, if they're good at what they're doing, let's put them in and we're going to start winning. It doesn't matter.
Right.
But just say that it was 10 years later in the 80s instead of the 70s where they started looking at historically Black colleges. How long will the NFL how would it look today?
I think that the NFL would be kind of would be the same. Okay, I think the best way to ask that question, I think, would be what would the NFL be like had I'm thinking I might be asking it the same way, but had the NFL decided to take the black colleges seriously, like after when they did, because the AFL was a team with the league that really looked at black colleges more than anybody else. The
That's
NFL
right.
really wasn't into it that much. I mean, you had the Chargers, the Raiders, and the Chiefs were the main ones that were looking at black college athletes. They were the three main ones, and they were the ones who won mostly. Um, the Chargers and Sid Gilman was one of the first teams to really reach out to the black colleges. Al Davis was a member of Sid Gilman's staff who went to scout all of these black colleges and stuff in the early '60s. That was what gave and Al Davis just brought that same idea when he became head coach and GM of the Raiders in '63. But I think that with the black college, with the black colleges, I think that you had like a group of colleges that really wasn't looked at the way that they should have been looked at by the NFL. I think that if the NFL would have took a serious look at them in the '60s, the same time the AFL did, then it would have been the game would have gone a lot further along, a lot quicker than what it actually did. But I think that right now we pretty much be at the same spot where we are now. But I think that if the NFL would have taken a look at the black colleges at the same time and at the same intensity that the AFL did during that time, then the NFL would be a lot different. I don't think Green Bay would have won the championship that they did. I think teams like Cleveland with Jim Brown's influence, I think Jim Brown might have stayed with Cleveland just a couple of more years. And I think the NFL would have been vastly different than what it ended up being without, like the AFL did, you know what I mean?
Understand. And looking back, the AFL knew what they were doing. They knew what they were doing. Number one, talent.
Right.
But number two, they were a conference or a league that was trying to make headways.
Right.
And they were making headways by saying, you know what, we're not worried about color or where you grew up. We want talent. And I think if you're bringing up Al Davis said as much. He didn't care who you were, just can you play the game?
Right. One of his favorite quotes is, we don't care where you come from or what color your skin is. If we want winners. That's what we want to win. And we didn't care where you came from or whatever. They didn't care. Sid Gilman was the one, because Sid Gilman, the coach of the Chargers, was the first coach that gave room assignments on the road to people that was on defense. Like, defense players would room together, offensive players would room together. Before that, it wasn't that. It was like defensive players sleep, you two defensive players, y'all sleep together, so on and so forth. And they gave room assignments based on position rather than color, pretty much. And Sid Gilman was the first to do that.
Now, I'm sure it took some getting used to. I'm sure it did. But you know what? Seeing how the Chargers handle things, and especially now, and I'll tell you what, men like Ben Roethlisberger owe a lot to people like Terry Bradshaw.
Right.
Men like Russell Wilson owe a lot to people from the 60s and 70s who paved the way for us to be the way we are right now. And we owe a lot to them.
Yeah.
We owe a lot to them. And again, when we start to see a society where we don't care about the color, we care about the content of their character, I think we're on the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I was taught early on when I was playing, doing as a kid growing up and everything, was that once you get in between them four lines, it don't matter. Can you play? Yeah, if you could play, then that's fine. Or like a musician, because musicians could. Because I'm a big jazz historian too. I love jazz, and blacks and whites couldn't play together in jazz bands, but they used to have something called breakfast dances where the blacks and whites would get together after hours and just jam, and one of the things about it was that in same way in sports that, we learn from each other from different ways, players get taught different ways, but once you get to the end means of winning games and stuff like that, there's a natural camaraderie that starts. There's a natural teammate. There's a natural friendship that develops over time because everyone is going towards that one goal, and that's winning games, winning championships, being successful, and that's all part of it, and that's all part of the whole thing about playing sports in any sport, really. That the having this one goal of winning a championship or one goal of being successful, and that's the main thing that drives the whole thing.
And see, this is the type of information you get on a Historically Speaking podcast. And when does it drop, my friend?
Well, I got another episode that's coming up that I'm in the process of doing as we speak, actually, and it's and most notably, this is like my Black History edition, one of two episodes that are considering the Black History episodes of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. This one that I'm working on, just a little sneak peek. This one that I'm working on is going to be dealing with the 1975 NBA Finals between the Washington Bullets and the Golden State Warriors. Why is that so important? That is the first time in pro sports history where you had two African-American coaches facing off for a league championship.
1975.
Yes. The second time, of course, was Super Bowl 41 between the Bears and the Colts. But
I remember that one. I remember that.
But the first one, 1975, Golden State and Washington.
I forget that the Bullets were called the Bullets at one point.
Yep.
I can't remember.
Wizards now.
Yeah, I can't remember why they dropped the Bullets, but maybe because they don't like the idea of guns. But
that's exactly right.
Oh, is that what it is?
That's exactly right. The owner of the Bullets at the time was, can't think of his name right off. It's not Ted Leonsis, but it's another guy. Abe Poland was the owner of the Bullets at the time, and he didn't like the name because it represented violence and all of the gun crimes that was going on in Washington at the time in the mid-'90s. So at that time, he said, we're going to drop the name. We're going to call them Wizards.
Well, you can do what you want to. It's your team. Yeah. It's your team. But, I kind of going back, and it's way off the subject of football, but I grew up in the 80s, and my favorite player was Magic Johnson.
Okay.
And I always thought if I could do anything like Magic when I was playing basketball, I would be something else. And I could not do anything like Urban Magic Johnson. But I remember watching him and Larry Bird go at it. And I tell you what, when you do one over Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, let me know, because that to me is one of the greatest rivalries of all time. Those two guys.
Yeah, I'm doing eventually, I think for the All-Star game, which is coming up in a couple of weeks here in Atlanta, I'm going to do one with my all-time All-Star teams from my childhood or from my lifetime, which is from 1979 on. Because I remember when Magic played Bird in college for the championship. I remember that as a kid. I was 5 years old at the time, but I remember sitting there drinking the Coke with my grandpa, watching that game, and that was like my first experience of college basketball with him. And I'm a big sports fan, period. But if I had to choose college basketball over NBA by a very, very slim hair, it would be college basketball over NBA, but very, very, very slender.
Now I'm going to test you right now. Are you ready?
Go ahead.
1992.
Okay.
Summer Olympics. I believe it was Barcelona.
Yep.
Can you name 5 of the Dream Team?
I could name everybody on the Dream
Team.
Team.
Good gracious. I want to hear them. Let's go.
You want to start in 5?
Oh my goodness. See, this is what you get from the Historically Speaking podcast. Go ahead.
Okay. Starting 5. Backcourt, Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan.
Right.
The front court was Larry Bird, Scottie Pippen, and David Robinson.
You know what? I forgot the Admiral was on that team. He sure was, wasn't he?
Yep.
Then you had
the second 5 was John Stockton,
right?
Clyde Drexler,
Clyde the Glide,
let's see, Patrick Ewing was center. Karl Malone was power forward. Christian Laettner was the only college player.
Yes, he was.
Chris Mullin was on that team.
Yes.
And I'm missing one.
I am
Charles
too.
Barkley.
That's right. Chuck was on that too. And surprise, surprise, they didn't lose a game.
They didn't have a bad game. They didn't have a bad game.
It wasn't even close. If you and I think, Dana, I had a coat or a jacket from Kellogg's, and I used to have it. It had all the team on it. And when I opened the bag, it smelled like awful. So I didn't wear them because it was like paper thin, but I had the coat.
Yeah.
That team right there, if you had them in their prime, they could probably beat most of the teams that you have around today.
If you had them in their prime, I can't see them losing at all.
Well, I remember Larry Bird was on his stomach most of the time because his back was so bad. But that team, if you're listening to this and you're not from our time frame, Google it. That team was amazing, and they pretty much said, "We are your daddy, and you're not going to beat us." And I think most games were within 30 or 40 points, if that close.
The fun part was I watched the documentary on them, and I would have loved to have been sitting in the stands doing practice. Can you imagine their practices? That
probably was closer than the game itself.
They were. They can you Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan? They had to put them on opposite teams because if they were together, they would win every game. That's how crazy it was.
Now I'm looking, and we're going to wrap this up in just a second, but I'm looking at the Zoom meeting, and Dana came on wearing his powder blue and dark blue Chargers hat, and you know what? I can respect the hat. I really can. But what I can respect more is in the background, there's an original. Well, go ahead. Tell them what's in the background to your left, or to my left, your right.
Well, there's a poster of the original Star Wars movie poster from 1977.
1977. And I asked him, and I said, I wanted him to be honest. Are you a nerd? And he said he is. So, folks, there's so much right here, so much man love going on right now between the two of us. Number one, we're connecting on basketball trivia, and number two, we're connecting on being nerds. Because I'm looking in the back, in my back, I have Batman stuff everywhere around this office. See, there's a lot in common here, and that's part of the reason why I'm glad he is. Dana is part of our Sports History Network, but also he's a good person. Good man, and I'm glad that he came on tonight.
Oh, man, I'm glad to be here, man. I have fun doing this every time with you, man, and hope to be back on, one more time in the future.
Oh, we got more than one time. You could be the Football's Family podcast. You could be our resident stats guy. But if you got somebody, it's something to leave us with, some fact that, historically speaking, we wouldn't know, just anything. I don't care what sport it is. What would it be?
Oh gosh, there's so much to get after. But I'm gonna leave you with this. I'm gonna leave you with a funny story that I was prepared to tell you tonight.
Oh, good.
And it's football. It's a football story, and it deals with me and my wife while we were dating. Okay. One Sunday afternoon, the Chargers were an off week, and we went out to New Orleans or something. And I think it was New Orleans, actually. And we just spent the day together, whatever. So we decided that we were hungry. We wanted to go get something to eat. Well, we walked into this restaurant, and they had the Saints game on. The Saints were playing Jacksonville, okay? And it was a little time left on the clock. They had like a minute left or something, and the Saints got the ball. Jacksonville had just scored. They were up by 7. So we think, okay, we came in the right time. They're going to drive down the field, possibly score. Who knows? Okay. So we're sitting down, we're looking at the TV, right? Then it happened. I don't know if you remember this, but there was this one play we played against the Jags where they threw the pass to Joe Horn. Joe Horn pitched it off to Deuce McAllister. Deuce McAllister pitched it off to Devery Henderson.
Yes.
And it kept going and going and going.
What do they call that? The relay? What do they call it?
I think it was like the Jacksonville or the Gator Bowl relay or something like that. I forgot what he called it. But the Saints scored. And people in the restaurant were just totally beside themselves, right? My wife, who is a Saints fan, was just so excited, And me, being a somewhat Saints fan, but more so Chargers fan than anything. And you know how sometimes you think of something in your head and you accidentally say it?
Oh, I do that all the time. I get you. I understand completely.
Well, that day, I sitting out there setting up for the extra point. And I said out loud in front of all these people, why do I get the feeling he's going to miss? Sure enough, John Carney, former Charger, snap, spot, kick, wide right. He missed it. The Saints lose. If you would have saw, if looks could kill, I would have been a dead man. Everybody in that restaurant gave me the look of death, including my future wife. It would have been like if looks were guns, I would have been James Caan in The Godfather when he got shot up at that toll booth.
Oh,
it was that bad. And my wife, it was an hour trip back home. She didn't speak to me the whole ride back.
And how long you been married?
I've been married since 2005. So, no, actually, 2004. Actually, if my wife hears me, I misquoted the year, she'd kill me. But 2004, we got married.
Has she forgiven you?
Yes and no. I'm not allowed to say, when things happen with the Saints, I'm not allowed to say anything. She just give me this look like, don't you dare say a word.
And you've learned, hadn't you?
Yes, I have. Oh, yeah. Yes, I have. Yes, I have. I've learned many lessons over and over and over again. I've learned.
I remember that game, but boy, I tell you what, I'm sure some of those fans in that restaurant were a little inebriated, and they probably would have acted.
I was like, please, let me just leave out of here. Look, I don't even want to eat anymore. Let me just leave, but
Ticket.
But that was I remember that every time they show that play, I just think about the looks I got that night.
Now, were you wearing Charger stuff in there?
I don't remember if I was or not because it was an off week. And so normally if I'm out somewhere and the Chargers aren't playing, I normally don't. So I probably was wearing just like a random baseball hat I had. So
it probably saved your life that day.
I think at that time there were people just like kind of indifferent, But I did mention that Carney missed the field. After Carney missed the field goal, we were heading home, and I was like, "That's the reason why the Chargers released him." And my wife just looked at me with just like this really blank stare, like you had to throw that in there right about the Chargers, right? Like screw you and the Chargers, just stuff like that. So.
Well, where can we find you, and what can we listen to hear your voice?
Well, once again, you can find me as part of the Sports History Network, the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. You could also find me on Twitter, Historically SP and the number 2. You can find me dropping knowledge every day about different things that happen in sports history, as well as just random thoughts and ideas on Twitter. And I'm trying to get it to where every show drops on Sunday or Monday, somewhere around that. So I have a show coming up within the next couple of days, within the next few days, and also another show coming right after that. Currently, again, like I said, I was working on my Black History Month podcast dealing with the 75 NBA Finals, and the one after that, did a little preview. The one after that, we'll be talking about the 1974 Pittsburgh Pirates, the first team in Major League history to have an all-Black and Hispanic lineup. So that's a couple of things that's in the hopper going on right now.
Well, thank you, Dana, for joining us today, and we'll have you back on.
Oh, man, I'm looking forward to it, man. Anytime, man. I had a blast once again.
And that's why football is family. Thank you.
Right on.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
At the Sports History Network, we're all about sports yesteryear, and so we're so pleased to introduce you to Row One, an online memorabilia gallery and shop that brings your sports history to life anywhere. The Row One gallery includes over 5,200 gorgeously reproduced prints of team posters, game program covers, game tickets, advertisements, and more in baseball, pro and college football, pro and college basketball, and more. And any gallery item may be printed in a variety of sizes on wood, metal, canvas, acrylic, or poster paper. And in Row One shop, check out the thousands more of unique items with the retro and historical designs dating back to 1876, including t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, phone cases, mugs, blankets, pillows, towels, and even shower curtains. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com, ROW1, for access to the full Row One catalog and for gallery prints and gift items, plus get a 15% discount off all prints on the Row One Pictorum Gallery with coupon code SHN15. Follow the link on the show notes.